I didn't intend to put a commentary onto this collection originally. I had posted it on YouTube with a musical background, which was three old-time, very old songs, which it never occurred to me would be copyright, as they're going on 100 years old each. But there you go. I did get a copyright warning, so I immediately took it down, and here goes with this second version. I've put together the montages in this collection as a memory of my parents' 8-year period immediately after World War II in my father's hometown, Stockton-on-Tees. Unfortunately, they don't duplicate the quality of the original photographs, which were all taken, developed and printed by my father for use principally on 5-square-foot montage display boards used as advertising in the bay window frontage of number 6 Regent Street. The austerity of the times is also evident with some pictures when good background sheets and rear flash units were not popularly or generally available, usually only affordable by professional studio photographers. On moving to London in 1954, a large theatrical skip packed with memorabilia was warehouse stored for 3 years. But when it was retrieved, although heavily lined with waterproof American cloth, as they called it then, the contents were found to be one solidly congealed wet mass. There had been an undetected roof leak, and all my parents' music, operatic scores, show cards, show bills, personal and career photographs, some costumes, 2 musical instruments, and all sorts of memorabilia were just totally destroyed. The exception was a plastic zipped document case containing a ragbag of odds and ends, mainly leftovers from working on the window displays. Although intended to be thrown away, he just happened to chuck it into the top of the skip as there was a little spare space. Most of these photos are postcard size or smaller, and in rough condition. Some just rough proof prints, say that fast, or water damaged. But with the help of modern computer and scanning programs, which would have made my father's eyes gleam with envy, I've done my best to transform them into reasonably identifiable images of those concerned. I hope that at least there may be some sociological interest, and just possibly provide a few moments of nostalgic pleasure if stumbled upon by an ex-student, although in 2016 they would be at least in their late 60s, who might recognize his or herself. Looking back over 60 years, although I recognize many faces, I must apologize for only remembering a handful of names. Although all these comments are included in the pictures themselves, this actually doesn't come up as well on YouTube as they do on the original posting, which is onto the Picture Stockton site, which is part of Stockton Museum, as I've noted on the intro. So, I'll repeat all the dialogue here. Page 6. One of my mother's various skills was tailoring, so she not only designed all the multifarious costumes in these shows, but made the patterns and cut out the materials. She machined up the greater percentage herself, with help from, with the rest from Mrs. Daubeny and at least one other mother, and some of the mothers sewed up those for their own children. As clothing rationing did not end until 1949, I've no idea how she managed to obtain and reuse the materials needed for the first shows, but know my parents to be scrupulously honest, so there was no question of any black market involvement. And as times were still hard for most parents, she made the tiniest possible profit from the production of many, many hundreds of costumes. At montage number 18, which is the Billingham Press front page spread from I've forgotten when it was now, 1949 or 48 something. I do recall that this actual performance was definitely by request, as my mother again had a serious health problem which not long after resulted in more major surgery. For this reason, as they'd already staged a bunch of performances that year, my father was very much against further stress on her behalf. I can't remember the charity which this time benefited from the proceeds, but he gave in to her wish to agree to the request. Cannot remember the title of this production, but it was either the second or the third which they devised and presented, as a previous student was Dolores, who was now a professional and had appeared in previous productions. In between shows, as she was still working, she made a guest appearance, as can be seen from this photograph, in the show. Number 19 underlies why all underlines at least why all theatricals are deeply suspicious of the press and the results of any interviews, etc. Lone boy dancer in the cast of 80. No, he wasn't. I was a singer and an actor. I originally, as is not in the, I may as well mention it now, why not? Originally, when I was, 4 years old, my mother, during the war, she had taught me 2 short routines of tap at 4. She was, unbelievably ill. She had what they call sleeping pneumonia, and it led eventually to an empyema, which meant that she was emergency hospitalized, and I won't go into the details of that, but they actually gave her up and didn't think she'd live. Meanwhile, I was rushed off 50 miles away to my grandmother to stay there. Well, I won't go on about my grandmother, but the first thing she did was destroy all my soft toys which my mother had made for me, and then tell me that only sissies danced. Little boys didn't dance. Things at that age do go in. So although our doctor, when he called to see my mother, the first thing he wanted to do was, now come on, let's see your little fella dance. Let's see the... I had to perform for him before he would examine my mother. However, my grandmother was of a different mentality altogether, I'm afraid. And therefore, when I returned home and my mother was out of hospital, I didn't want to know about dancing. My mother was very wise, and she said, okay, you'll come to it before it comes to you. And that was the end of that for a long, long time. The upshot was that in the shows, I say I didn't dance. It's not quite true. What I would do was comedy, no problem. So in Dick Whittington, I think it was, can't look back anyway, as I was a mad roller skater, I was very, very keen on roller skating as a child. My mother said, why not incorporate it? Let's have you as Idlejack make an entrance on your roller skates, and a crazy entrance all over the stage, and look as though you're going to end up flat on your back, but eventually actually you don't. You save yourself. All of which I could do gymnastically on skates. And then, when we'd rehearsed that, she said, I don't know, why don't we put in a few tap steps, and you could finish off with just a little routine on tap. Well, that didn't bother me, because that didn't really seem like sissy boys dancing, doing tap on roller skates. So that's what I did, and that went very, very well. The other exception to the rule was with my girlfriend, Sheila Moore, who can be seen in the photograph, where we did a comedy adagio, where I doubled as the, I don't know, I think it must have been Dick Whittington again, as the Prince or King of Morocco. And as there's nothing in that sort of character anyway, my mother said, why don't we stick something in? And we did a comedy adagio, and as can be seen, the whole gag was that everything goes wrong. I get battered by my partner through everything going wrong, so at the end I'm so punchy that she picks me up and she carries me off. That also had nothing to do, as far as I'm concerned, with sissy boy dancing. The interesting adjunct to it was that many years later, in 1961, and I'd finished my national service in the RAF, I came out, grabbed a panto at Liverpool Empire as a singer with where are we? Robinson Crusoe, that's right, with Bruce Forsyth. Immediately after that, I should have taken up a contract for repertory with Harry Hansen, which had been there since I was 12 years old, offered to me. But I won't go into the various reasons. The whole point was the best that could be offered then was Rep had gone down so much, instead of having 22 companies, he was now reduced to 2. They ran summer seasons. As juvenile lead, then I would have had £9 a week salary. I just got out of panto at £12 a week as a singer. And the London Palladium, I'll try that again, advertised for singers for the summer show. And that was a 7-month run, not a little summer season of about 5 at very best. And when one auditioned, which I thought, have a go, found that it was actually a new idea of George Carden's, because one auditioned to be accepted as a singer, got through that fine. Then he was auditioning people to see how well they could move, because he was fed up to the back teeth with what we used to call the braced up male singers, who were very much we are the first, and the boy dancers who were everything's coming up roses. That's a terrible exaggeration, but it does tend to have a lot of truth in it. And he wanted singer dancers, not singers who would not move, who were like ramrods, and dance as well. So the upshot of that was that 6 of us passed this audition as being good movers, and his idea was that by the time we'd finished rehearsals, we would be doing several, well, certainly 1 or 2 of the routines that he would have set for trained dancers, and the others would fine for good movers. I mean, good knows there were, don't know how many Shanies in that show offhand, but a heck of a lot. And indeed, by the end of the rehearsal period, we were good hoofers. That, as my mother said, well, I came to it. And indeed, a few years after that, when I set up my Mr. Variety Act with the xylophone, the banjo, uke, penny whistle, straight singing, I included a soft shoe routine always, and that always went very well. Well, back to Lone Boy Dancer in the cast of 80, no. So, never trust the press. At 21, getting on to professional productions in which some of my parents' students were involved. Students, of course, received a salary for performing in pantomimes such as these, but my parents never registered as professional agents or bookers, so they took no payment or profit when booking them into shows such as these, or paving the way for any student who wished to turn professional by arranging auditions and introductions to such high-profile managements as Marie de Vere, Winstanley, not Wynette, and certainly not Miss Bluebell, who twice wrote to asking to see dancers, and finally received a rather stern reply asking her not to make any further contact, as my mother at the time was very suspicious of her contracts, plus the fact that she had no interest in allowing any of her dancers to possibly appear topless in productions later on and get the backlash for that. It was a very different time sociologically. And also the Ballyramba were very kind. It's a shame that amongst the destroyed material there was a letter professing complete satisfaction with a student who had auditioned for the Ramba. My mother taught the Cicchetti ballet method, which they employed, and that they'd take great pleasure in seeing any other students which my mother might see fit to send them in the future, which is pretty good from a company of that standing, worldwide standing. And sadly, with the 1947 Cone Week pantomime, they had to take legal action against Arthur Lane, as he reneged on travel and accommodation payments for the juveniles and the matron. And ironically, many years later, I'd forgotten this, so they ruefully reminded me of it when I found myself booked in a tour of The Belle of New York, starring Marion Studholme, it being a production of the Lupton Lane management, of which he was then co-partner with his wife, Audrey Lupton. However, as they say, that's showbiz. Moving on to number 22, at one point the local tax inspector asked to see my parents' books, and after declaring them to be 100% correct, he explained that a flag had been raised because, with all the work involved in staging the mass of their own shows, with all profits going to charities, it was the first time that he'd come across anyone who didn't take an organizer's fee. Although perfectly entitled to do so, my father said that they felt that all these endeavours were good for publicity for the studio, and that was what they were content with. In the early 1950s, the pound had a purchasing power of around £21 today. It varied quite a lot during that period, but it was that, if not more, just a little at the beginning of the 50s. So when you look at this donation of £74.11 and sixpence in that money, it seems to equate in modern terms to about £1,566, which ain't bad for a performance of young students going to charity. Taking this figure for at least an average donation, multiply it by the many, many shows which my parents staged in Stockton and surrounding areas, and in modern terms it adds up to charity donations of tens of thousands of pounds, which they carefully spread around a very wide range of recipients, from churches, Catholic, Protestant, Methodist, the various denominations, to scouts and other sorts of charitable recipients. The accompanying letter, unless it's not particularly clear on the screen, reads, address Stockton-on-Tees, March 24th, 1952. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Williams, on behalf of the members of our Women's Guild and myself, I wish you to accept our sincere thanks for the marvellous performance of the pantomime Little Red Riding Hood, which was given to us on Monday night. You must have put a tremendous lot of hard work into the training of these children. The financial part of it will help us a very great deal in the workings of our church. I ask you also to pass our thanks on to your pupils for the splendid performance. So now, thanking you most sincerely, I pray God will bless you both in your future life together. Best wishes, yours sincerely, E. Godwin. Which is a small coincidence because, of course, my father and mother first met in the Godwin Opera Company. No relation to this dear lady, presumably. Moving to 23, this is a small ticket sample of the productions which some of the productions anyway, my parents staged. I can't recall the title of the first review or when it was staged, but guessing at my age in some of the photographs, I would imagine 47, possibly 48. Although these shows, I'll say again, although these tickets show mainly Holy Trinity Hall, with proceeds going to associated charities, the stage I remember most was that of the YMCA Little Theatre in Dovecote Street. We did many performances there, the bulk of them, in fact, I should think, and a bunch of performances each year covering venues as far afield as Gisborough. See the above letter. A wide variety of church, social, other charities received the profits from these shows. At the time, 2 shillings was worth around £2 in today's money, although the range, variety and quality of items which it would purchase was vastly smaller than nowadays. Having appreciation letters from recipients of the proceeds of the shows. In case some people's screens won't blow up this sheet, it reads, Beach Road, Gisborough, Yorks, on behalf of the committee and residents of the Beach and Oak Road Coronation Party, together with many officials, difficult for me to read even, how very fortunate we were to have such a wonderful show as you so kindly brought to Gisborough. You are still talked about with admiration. The hours of training and patience needed to put on such a show must be considerable. We realize how lucky we were to have you with us, and do indeed thank everyone. You gave the children and adults a great deal of pleasure, not often found at Gisborough. We hope to bring a coachload of people. Try again, here we are, yep. What's happened there? It's gone off the screen. Right, we hope to bring a coachload of people to your next show, if permissible. We enjoyed you all so much. Sincere regards, on behalf of all here, Mrs. Marjorie Langley. And then the receipt, I think, elsewhere is for that particular show, probably, I'm not sure, for the donation. A sign of the times saying entertainment sort of thing not seen in Gisborough. They were hard times all round. Television was limited, radio was limited as well, movies, variety shows, But they were much harder times. Nobody under the age of 50 can really, I think, empathise with that period, certainly up to the start of the 60s. Finally, my father, whose stage name was Yestin Williams, joined the touring Godwin Opera Company in 1930, and he met my mother, who was the principal ballerina. They married, later toured as a double act in various shows, with my father also doing solo concert work. My mother, as an all-round dancer, also used the xylophone and the accordion, and one of her specialities, with the audience counting them out loud, was 100+ kicks on pointed toes, straight up and down, each hitting a tambourine which my father held over her head. Look at point dances in ballet and figure out the strain of that. Then my birth and World War II intervened. Afterwards, in 1945, in London, he was offered principal tenor in the soon-to-be-formed New London Opera Company. This contract eventually went to Lester Ferguson. And he was also offered vocal dubbing at the Rank Film Studios, plus, when they saw his photograph and thought that he had a good character face, they offered a later screen test. Meanwhile, he ended the producer's long search for a Geely-type singing voice by landing a contract as tenor in the Jack Hobart revue Here Come the Boys, which, after opening in Edinburgh, was to go into London's West End. Sadly, all this changed when he was in Edinburgh, as my mother's health again broke down savagely. Both she and I had suffered major health problems at my birth, and as my father thought more of the pair of us than his career, he left the show, threw away these offers, and despite my mother's protests, decided that we would settle down. His family's old hosiery business premises in Regent Street were now available for them to rent and turn into studios, so, having other skills at his fingertips, he said that he'd take civilian employment, my mother could teach, and I would have a settled schooling. This decision my father felt was later justified, as during the war my mother developed pleural empyema, and it was the second time that he'd been told that it was thought that she couldn't survive. Such was her willpower that she managed to pull through. But then again in 1949, a long illness led to another major operation, which the surgeon stated, had it been left for a few weeks later, would not have saved her life. He noted that it was only the fact that our doctor, Dr. Clark, had surgeon's hands, which had led him to develop a strong hunch that finally prompted an operation for something which at the time could not otherwise have been diagnosed. With my own marriage of 46 years now, I can understand my father's devotion, as after my mother finally passed away aged 73, he mourned every day of the 11 years during which he survived her. My mother was held in great affection, obviously, by her pupils, so as my father had always wanted to return to London as soon as I finished my schooling, there were many tears shed when they closed the studios. Even 9 years after the war, any form of London accommodation was still in short supply, so we moved several times until they settled into their final house in Edmonton. Such is life, that with that they lost touch with Stockton pupils, families, etc. The only later contract, until 1963, when I played the old Hippodrome with a tour of Snow White starring Ruby Murray and caught up with Noba Thomas and Margarita Daubeny, was with June Gray, who was the last of the pupils seriously wishing to turn professional. They invited her down to stay with us in London, whilst helping her to secure a contract, and upon which she disappeared into the blue. We eventually heard a rumour that she'd become a speciality act using snakes, and had appeared with this in a couple of Hammer Studio movies, but we never managed to confirm it. And presumably, obviously, she could never get in touch with us again because we'd moved houses several times. As for myself, should anyone be curious, at age 60, finding that along with many other professions nowadays, mine had changed to the point where I no longer respected it. I decided that I could afford to retire, and 17 years later still find that there aren't enough hours in the day for all I wish to accomplish. A couple of compatriots kept nagging that I put nothing on YouTube, so I finally delved into our never-watched collection of videos, etc., and posted a few items of self, my wife, and of other artists, friends who didn't have anything on there and now deceased, and I thought that was rather a shame. October 2016.